General Fox, Lieutenant General Fox, AOCSC, extensive CV that's in your program, and she's had significant operational experience. But I think she should be recognised as the first female to be appointed as a Deputy Service Chief, the first woman to be promoted to a 3-star rank in the Australian Defence Force, and about a week after that announcement was made, she was made an order in the Order of Australia, received the AO. I sent her an email at the time and said, you better go out and buy a lottery ticket for the third bit of good news. But hopefully she will give us all the answers tonight of what we need to do to fix our retention and recruitment problem. Thank you.
Hi everyone, and thanks Paul for that very kind introduction. Before I begin, I'd just like to acknowledge the Gadigal people and peoples and families of the broader Sydney region, our First Nations people and custodians of the land. I actually also add to that, I'd like to thank the First Nations people for the care of the land, the waterways and the stories of the skies and stars from which your Australian Defence Force deploys on, from and to. And so all the distinguished guests in the room, thank you for having me here. I know I've only got a few minutes and I've got the timekeepers up the back. I could talk for hours and probably days on this topic. It dominates my working day. I sleep solutions to it as well. And I have conversations right across community, right across the Australian Defence Force about exactly this topic. And it was really great to see all of our young panellists earlier thinking about the same things. And that should give everyone confidence that our young people are interested in serving. And I'll give you a run through in relation to some numbers that actually give you that confidence as well. The strategy is what we're doing, is what we're pursuing against a designed and integrated Australian Defence Force. And that has been mentioned, gets reviewed every 2 years. And in reviewing every 2 years, yes, it may not be out far enough, but things are changing so quickly in that 2 years, it helps us reset and focus on where we still need to go, still with an eye on a future force that is out 5, 10, 15 years of some of the capabilities that we need to acquire. Now let me begin with an overview for you of the Australian Defence Force, and I'll let you know how it compares to 1 year ago. Now, obviously we have a combination of people serving full-time, part-time, maybe people enlisted today, and we have people who have served for over 40 years. And people now have flexibility in serving many different ways in what we call the total workforce system. Paul O'Neill made reference to the Haythorne-Thwaite review or the zigzag career. Our total workforce system is that. Your Australian Defence Force has around 58,600 people in the permanent force, and this is around, in the permanent force, 1,400 people more than this time last year. We have bottomed out in our separation rates coming out of COVID across all three services. Up on the slide, it's a different figure. You can see at the moment that 60,000 figure. That figure includes gap year, includes people on full-time service, and so we have multiple ways in which we generate the full-time force as opposed to a permanent force. So please take that into consideration. That is the power of a total workforce system, how we force generate. So we have around 33,000 people providing reserve service, which is 1,000 more than last year as well. And our fabulous reservists, and I know there are a few in the room, offer us great capability in that total workforce system and are incredible how they juggle multiple careers and give us different perspective. And I really stand in awe of how they are able to do that. We have another 9,000 in a category where they're not rendering service, but they're available to be called on for service should we require that. We have people move between all service categories all the time. What we're working on is to make that go faster so people can serve when they are able to serve, when their life and what's happening in their life enables them to provide service. Whether it is they've had a family and they don't really want to deploy while their kids are young and they do some more reserve service and are a bit more fixed in location, and then when kids grow up they come back into full-time. That's what the total workforce system is all about. I said women make up around 21%, our First Nations are 3.9%, and importantly, our culturally and linguistically diverse population is just under 29%. Please keep that in mind because I'll talk about the Australian population very shortly. These figures are trending up in a steady rate. Our demographics are shifting. The median age on entry into the Australian Defence Force is 23. Our median age for the full-time force is 31 and our reservists is 43. There are more millennials or Generation Ys than any other generation in the Australian Defence Force, and Gen Z is on the rise, and they make up 1/3 of the Australian Defence Force. Gen Xers and Gen Xers are born from 1965 to 1980. They make up just 1/5. We still have boomers providing service in the Australian Defence Force. They're between 61 and 70 years old. Now, they're about 5.6%. Generations are really important because that tells us we need to communicate right across the breadth of an age demographic of Australia, internally and externally. It tells us we need to have a training system that accounts for how people learn differently in an education system. So, and it tells us as well, when you're thinking about a generational lens, where we need to be recruiting and where you may not see us recruiting because we're where the Gen Zs are, and they're not looking at TVs. They're on different social media platforms. And you heard some of our young people talk about that. Our people are drawn from the society in which we serve, and Australian demographics are changing. Of particular interest is the change in the number of working age people, expected to increase by 3 million by 2050, balanced with the increasing number of people born overseas. And that's really important when you think about our security clearances and how we tackle that. Generationally, more people migrate to Australia than away from Australia. And the net flow of migrants is contributing to the growth of our population. The overseas-born population has been growing at a faster rate than the Australian-born population since the beginning of post-World War II migration. Over the past 20 years, the proportion of Australia's population born overseas has increased from about just under 24% in 2004 to just under or 31.5% in 2024. By comparison, the United States population is really 15.2% of people born overseas. The population who are born overseas for Australia that are increasing our growth are from England, India, China and New Zealand, in that order. And so when we think about security, we think about where we're targeting recruiting, and we think about a growing population and your ADF being and looking like the community it serves. You can't be what you can't see. Then that's what we're looking at in terms of how we are attracting people, where we might be recruiting that you're not seeing. So those born in India are the largest increase in population since 2014, followed by China, Philippines and Nepal. So it's been mentioned as well, the labour markets are changing shape due to technology, with increasing demands for people who can build and maintain more automation, digitisation, and a decreasing demand for more manual types of roles, or roles that automation can replace. So this influences how we recruit people too. If we take into account a population demographic, if we take into account what we're doing now, and if we're taking into account the capabilities that are coming in over generations, we have to recruit for potential. And so that's the potential to train, to learn, and potentially to do roles that don't exist now. So our whole system has to be agile in a manner that can adapt over time. And part of the key aspects of the Australian Defence Force, and we should never underestimate it, is our training system and our incredible trainers who are military trainers and some civilian trainers who train the ADF to fulfil those warfighting functions, to reskill to roles where we need them over time. Now, to understand the recruiting demographic and the pool of people who can and will join our ADF, we always look at propensity to join and eligibility to join and serve. Now, when the various eligibility criteria for the military service are overlaid against the population who have the propensity to join, this results in just 16% of all 17 to 24-year-old Australians. This number is at less than 450,000 people of the 2.8 million people in our target demographic. The national characteristics affecting the eligibility for the Australian Defence Force include disability, obesity, drugs, crime, and education, and that has been mentioned earlier. If you were to include further selection criteria for specific roles requiring greater levels of education, greater levels of aptitude, and different health attributes, the potential for leadership, this yields an even smaller number of people that are able or likely to serve. It may be an unmovable reality that a volunteer Australian Defence Force will only ever be able to recruit from a relatively small population against which there is significant competition from emergency services, from the university sector, so they are in our talent pool, from professional sporting organisations. They're similar characteristics that we're all recruiting from. And when you're recruiting in an environment of full employment, that is a challenge. We have that challenge to grow our permanent Australian Defence Force to 69,000 by the early 2030s, which is adding thousands of people while at the same time pivoting to new capabilities, working to ensure that the foundation workforce is in place for when the new capabilities arrive. Now, if I look at all the numbers and all the workforce intelligence across Australia, I think we can do that. We need 2.7 Australians per 1,000 Australians to join the Australian Defence Force. We have to make it easier to serve, and that's a body of work that we have been doing. The National Defence Strategy requires Defence to transition to an integrated focus force, as I mentioned, and it requires our people to adapt and reskill for capabilities and new concepts of operation. Now, we have done that in the past. Militaries have done that. That's what we keep doing and adapting over time. But what is different, and you feel it when you're in the military, is the pace of change and that tempo of having to continually adapt and reskill. We need people in areas of expertise where skill shortages exist, and that's the competition we're in for talent that we're in with the rest of Australia. If you're thinking technical and in industry and that's a challenge, it's the same challenge for the Australian Defence Force. Be it in the next 15 years, from our HIMARS capabilities, aviation systems, new maritime vessels, to nuclear submarines, uncrewed vehicles, new weaponry, new missiles, that we need to operate, maintain, to fight them, to integrate them, and command and control them through sophisticated systems for Australia. It wouldn't be a shock to you, those skills are in demand right across industry as well. Sustaining a modern defence force in Australia comes with really unique challenges in a nation, and you heard our young people talk about it, that values at the moment individual freedoms, economic opportunities and career diversity. We have to take steps to attract and retain that diverse group of people and provide that, what Paul called their value proposition, although that language doesn't resonate in the ADF, but provide a broad conditions of service and benefits for our people to serve is where we're talking. The workforce challenges are being addressed through a range of approaches, and over the last 2 years, I'll give you a quick run through. I say 2 years because that's the Defence Strategic Review. That's when I stood up as the Chief of Personnel. That's when we've anchored into a workforce plan against strategic review, and a lot of organisational change and change in approach has been delivered in flight in 2 years. We're widening the eligibility criteria to enable more people to serve in the Australian Defence Force, including expanding the eligible permanent residents living in Australia, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Expanding the recruiting system and translate a wider pool of eligible applicants into increased number of applications and enlistments. Improving our processes to enable faster recruiting so the skill gaps can be identified and we can address them more quickly in service through reskilling. Encouraging our current personnel who have built the skills and the experience that our Australian Defence Force needs to stay and serve longer. And they are some of the retention initiatives that we talked about earlier, and including an increased investment in skilling and modernising our employment conditions. Now, I've heard a lot today, and I'll try to address some of the questions that were raised today. You've heard a lot about the challenges in different countries doing different recruiting activities. Young Australians are continuing to apply and join our military. The Australian Defence Force is recruiting to over 300 different roles across the domains of maritime, land, air, space and cyber. Now, domains are pretty critical because our Australian Army is moving into a more maritime focus and littoral focus. So maritime is equally important to Navy as it is to Army in that respect. And Air Force with its sub-Hunter aircraft also have a bit of a maritime focus as well. So that's why I've raised domains rather than a service lens there. Now, there have been in the last year 80,000 applications to join the Australian Defence Force. Right now, we have 33,000 applications active in the system. And this financial year, and this is not well known, we are forecasting to recruit more people in volume than we have done in the last 15 years. Some of the 300 roles that we are recruiting to are at capacity. They're full because they're the designed roles that we need in the force that's coming. Although we don't turn people away, we talk to people when they come into the recruiting centres, and now with a lot more science behind recruiting, we offer them roles where other roles that they can join into, and we're trying to make the ability to skill in those roles and transfer into other trades later go faster as well, where the opportunities present. Now, there is about 1/3 of the people that walk into an Australian Defence Force recruiting centre or to talk to a recruiter that actually don't know what service they want to join, don't know what role they want to do. So they want to join the Australian Defence Force. And so we then talk to them and talk about their skills, their background. They do some testing. We understand some of the security clearance application matters, and then offer the roles that are available to them. Now, I'll let you know a bit more information as well. I know some of the shifts in what we're doing, and there are good signs there, and I have confidence that while we might not hit 100% of targets this year, in fact we're probably forecasting 70% of the voluminous targets that we have. That is still more than in 15 years. I know it'll be more again next year because of the foundations that we've put in place in flight, not stopping recruiting and changing everything. We will have more people join next year. We do have work to do. I'm under no illusion of that, and particularly around the time taken to recruit. But just to give you a positive sign, the Australian Defence Force recruits to ADFA, okay? It's our military university. We have around 333 positions each year. There are 4,700 applications for ADFA in flight right now. Our gap year roles are filling, and you can see on the slide how many gap year personnel we have. Our gap year program is really successful, and you've heard a couple of people refer to it. Over 65% of people who do the gap year program actually stay on in service. either full-time or in the part-time in reserves. And so that goes to the point people are not sure about a 3, 4, 9, 10-year commitment, but they're happy to come in for 1 year and realise that they love what they do, and then they stay. And that's fantastic. Now, we've been partnering with an outsourced service provider to do recruiting for more than 2 decades. In the early 2000s, Defence made a decision that only military would do roles that only military could do. And we would work with the civilian sector so that we could partner and they could do some of the more back-of-house functions. Recruiting back-of-house was one of those functions. Since we went to the back-of-house, there's only ever been 3 recruiting companies that have partnered with Defence. We first started, we partnered with Manpower Group Australia. When this current contract came up for review, it was worked on in the 2020 period, so all that coming through COVID period. We didn't want that same experience. There were 13 companies that tendered with the Australian Defence Force initially in a 2-pass approach or a request for quotation. That narrowed to 4. 4 went through to tender, and Adecco Australia was the recruiting partner that we joined with this time round. Adecco Australia took over coming out of the back end of COVID in 1st of July 2023, when our separation rates were skyrocketing. And that point where they were skyrocketing was also the point at which we were meant to grow. So the delta of what we had to recruit was substantial. We had to go from recruiting in the order of 8,000 targets a year to right now it's 10,500 targets a year. So not only did our new recruiting partner had to come in a hot employment market, significant separation rate, so we had to recover, they had to reform because we said we're not doing it the same. So Adecco had been on that journey with us since July 2023. But it is the Australian Defence Force people posted to recruiting, and there are I think there's about 600 of them in various full-time, part-time roles. They make the decision on who joins the Australian Defence Force, not the contractor. The contractor is providing us services, so our military people, our military recruiters who are trained in recruiting are in facing community, talking to people about what it is like to be in the Australian Defence Force. Yes, there might be a coordinator. Yes, there might be someone on the back of the phone that's not a military person initially, but it is our military people who make decisions. Now, there are lots of things happening concurrently to uplift recruiting. We've made policy changes that enable permanent residents to join the Australian Defence Force. They're from Five Eyes countries. And to go to Beck Shrimpton's point, we deliberately put in a policy provision that said you couldn't have been in another military in our Five Eyes partners for at least 2 years if you were to be a permanent resident. That's because we didn't want to strip, with our Five Eyes partners, New Zealand in particular, people from their military to join our military. So we had to think consequentially in policy settings around that. We have just under 600 applications in flight at the moment. We've had a few enlistments in that time since that Five Eyes policy came in, and there are quite a few that will join next year in that run. We also have another policy where we can have overseas lateral entry, and generally that's Commonwealth countries. We have 800 people who are already in militaries approaching us to join because our conditions of service, our employee value proposition is much better than theirs. And they have either visited Australia, been out here on exchange programs and understand our training system to a degree, but enjoy what Australia has to offer. And so this year we've had 179 join, 800 in the pipeline wanting to join. And we're working with Home Affairs on the skilled migration visas to enable that. That 800 people are generally in mid-career ranks that will help fill some of the hollowness. But it's how we onboard them into the Australian Defence Force that is critical in our training. We have and continue to adjust our medical entry requirements. We have 83 different settings for medical entry requirements, some of which haven't been reviewed for 25 years. Some of them were simple things like you couldn't join if you wore braces. You couldn't join if you had fertility problems. You couldn't join if you'd had endometriosis and been treated. You couldn't join if you had acne. You couldn't join if you broke your leg when you were 13 and we were really scared that we might hurt you again, yet you played rugby continuously and hadn't had other problems. So different musculoskeletal issues. We had people pay to go out and get specialist appointments for the hope of joining the ADF. We know they spent a lot of money to do that. We instantly put financial disadvantage into joining the ADF. That's gone. We pay if we send people to see a specialist in relation to a medical condition. If there is a challenge to that though, that individual then pays. So we're looking more at a functional assessment about the roles people are doing and modern medicine that you can join with certain conditions because modern medicine enables it even on an austere battlefield. Now, the medical questionnaire was 180 questions. I think people stopped joining the ADF at that point because they couldn't get through the questionnaire. It's now down in and around 25 questions. There's some drop downs, of course. So we're also adopting some digital and gamification activities. I've heard a lot about our recruiting. The big campaigns that you see, the ADF campaign with ADF Careers, if you're a marketer, it's at the top end of the funnel. It's about attracting you and sparking an interest just to make a call. Underneath that, there are many more layers in what we call the recruiting funnel that actually have more targeted conversations. We have a day in the life videos that show what roles are like. We have about to come online. One of our new innovations is a career discovery hub. They will have a bit of gamification in it that people can explore more different roles inside the Australian Defence Force. We have more social media contact with people. We have Ask Me Any Question environments on social media. We are recruiting on the Twitch platform. If I said in here, who knows what Twitch is? I'm looking at young people, where are you? Or parents that have got kids who are gamers. We are recruiting on YouTube. We are on TikTok. We don't use it to connect into our system, but we're advertising on TikTok. So we are places where you may not see us, but we are where the youth are. Of course, we are still in movie theatres. We're on the billboards, but we might be on there with a 3D version that sparks an interest. And you might see us in bus stops where people are waiting. In the ADF, we've released, under a trial arrangement, an ADF referral app. I think that with 60,000 people in our Australian Defence Force, everyone is a recruiter. It's a trial at the moment, so it's only targeted at the permanent force, where if an individual who's serving is talking to a young person at a barbecue, let's say, and they are interested in joining, through a QR code, they can refer them into DFR. Generally, when they're doing that, they know that person. They might keep then mentoring them through recruiting, and we know the first year in the military is probably the hardest year. People are homesick. There's that big training emphasis, and then that person might mentor them through recruiting. After a year, they'll get $1,000, okay, taxed, but $1,000 taxed for recruiting, assisting, because our people are our best recruiters. We also have a mobile ADF Career Centre. It's a bus. I always think, and some people might have heard me say this before, but I really like this story. The bus, it's bright and orange and it goes out into regional areas and attracts a lot of attention. Visited 94 towns last year. Australians are a bit crazy. They like buses. You may not know that there's actually a bus magazine in Australia. But the bus, the Mobile ADF Career Centre, made the centre spread of the bus magazine, and I was very proud that day. We also have a pop-up ADF Career Centre. We put it in location in Geelong for about 3 months. It was Geelong, not because the Deputy Prime Minister's from Geelong, by the way, but because we had applied science on population and where there were degrees of youth in our targeted demographic and where unemployment was. we had an increase of over 200% of applications from the Geelong region just because we put a pop-up career centre there. That pop-up career centre is up at Coffs Harbour at the moment. So we also have a new system in place in recruiting where we had fixated for quite a while on a Year 10 certificate as evidence. We know that a lot of people may not finish Year 10 or not get a Year 10 certificate for a variety of reasons. Doesn't mean they don't have potential. So we are now using the Building Key Skills Builder application, which is a literacy numeracy test versus a certificate to test people who don't have a certificate. And we've had over 1,000 people come through that system into the ADF as well. And we will continue to use that. Now, I've talked a lot about recruiting and what we're doing. We have more to do. It is in the order of 260 days to join the Australian Defence Force. That's from your application, your final application, because I can tell you people change their mind on what jobs they want to do a lot, and to a date of enlistment. But when I look at, we've been reforming this over 2 years. If I just look at last financial year, when a lot of the reforms were in play, there's about 10% of people who have joined the ADF, joined just in last financial year. That time frame is down as an average time frame of 143 days. So we're bringing it down and we'll continue to bring that down. Our recruiting partner is only paid a small management fee and paid per head count of who joins the Australian Defence Force. So they are incentivised, and we determine in the breakdown of headcount which are the most important roles. And so we know that you can't just focus on volume, it's about the roles as well that we need. So they are incentivised in the right way to join, for partnering with us to join the ADF. That is new, that hasn't been in place before. Our separation rates are the lowest they've been in over 20 years. In particular, our voluntary separation rate. Our rolling separation rate is 8.2%. 9.5% is the 10 and 20 year average, so we are well below. The voluntary rate for Army is 6%, Navy 4.3% and RAF 3.4%. That's voluntary to leave. So people are staying. Okay, so people are staying because we've also had to shift and focus on the other side of the coin, that retention side of the coin. We've made changes in terms of continuation bonuses. I know continuation bonuses can be divisive, but in order to put a block in and get people in a demographic that we need to stay for future capabilities, we had to do something. So the first thing is we sought with government to put a continuation bonus in play. We've doubled the health benefits available to families and the nature of which they can draw on to support cost of living. We've increased funding. In fact, we have $18.4 million in our Defence Assisted Study Scheme for ADF people to study what they want to study, to help them in personal and professional growth. We've had increased leave entitlements. Our people are entitled to 25 days leave a year now. We've increased our maritime allowance, our field allowance, to recognise the time people spent away and in the field doing the training that they're required to do to have a professional Australian Defence Force. We've also reduced the qualifying time for that to enable our fabulous reservists as well to access it. Our long service leave, you only now need to take 7 days to access long service leave. Previously, it was about 3 months you had to access it. So we've made different conditions of service more accessible for people. So where are we at? We have a budgeted workforce requirement to be at 58,850. We're at 59,047, so 197 people more. We are 326 people off the end of next financial year's target. We have, at this point in time, 78% of our inflow target achieved on all avenues of inflow into the permanent ADF. I'm not slowing down. And the incredible team I work with, we are focused on recruiting the future force, the 10,500 that we have to recruit from Australia for Australia. Now, young people are continuing that tradition to serve. What motivates them today is different to what motivates them in earlier years. But if I reflect and I look at what people are saying, why they are joining, people still say to me, or say in applications, I like to do something for my community. I want to help. That's not service in the term service, but if I look at the intention, if I look at how they're reflecting service, that is service. They're just calling it something different. We put the term service into play, not young people who are growing into service. So I think people join the ADF and they grow into service because they understand then what it means. So I don't like putting as much pressure on our young people saying they don't want to serve or they're not serving. You talked about you and all your family and mates who are in volunteer emergency services. They're serving. There are still people serving Australian, but doing it differently because their language, their generational shift is different to ours. We have overlaid our concept of service, and we just need to be really careful on that. Now, people stay for the reasons I've talked about as well, for service, because they end up enjoying the lifestyle. We end up having people come back to service who've left after a long period of time. They return. And what we have to get better at is recognising the skills they bring back into service, rather than assuming that while they've been out, they haven't actually done anything. And that's a bit of a mental shift for the Australian Defence Force. Now, I have a remit that's much larger than recruiting and retention. It's to set up a defence people system for the Australian Defence Force in particular, but part of a broader system, so that we can scale when we need to. I work with the Vice Chief of the Australian Defence Force on the design. He sets my priorities for recruiting. I work with the Deputy Secretary Defence People on the enterprise system. That's the policy and the strategy. And I work with the service chiefs and domain chiefs on professional mastery. They have the really critical role of professional mastery, of job design, of training and generating the Australian Defence Force, and I'm in support of them for that mission. My mission, though, is to command the military personnel organisation to provide, manage and prepare Australian Defence Force personnel to enable the integrated force in competition and conflict. I am responsible for recruiting, enabling careers, professional military education and military learning, health support, health services, support services, military justice, support to families, and pathways into service. The 33,000 school cadets that you see up on this slide and the 4,500 adult volunteers, I work with the services on that. 16% of school cadets join the military. That's who tell us they've been a school cadet. We've established a strategic engagement team, cadets, so that when a cadet chooses or might choose to have a career in the ADF, we can put wraps around them to support them through recruiting. But our cadet program is a development program. It's about helping instill civic options for them, that you heard previously. I talk to my Five Eyes partners all the time. In fact, I'm on a call twice next week with my UK counterpart. We all have those shared challenges and we're all testing different aspects of a system so that we can all go faster together. We have a workforce plan released just over 6 months ago. As part of that workforce plan, we're implementing the strategic review of the reserves. That has 17 recommendations, which include growing more fulsomely an ab initio reserve component for Navy and for Air Force. There are 8 objectives in the workforce plan: optimise the design of the integrated force, enhance ADF inflow. Notice I didn't say defence recruiting, I said inflow, because we generate from multiple areas and we have to go faster from multiple areas. Partner with defence industry, enhance ADF health services and our health readiness, develop the defence workforce, manage the integrated workforce, improve our culture, mental health and wellbeing, support defence personnel who might be transitioning from the ADF, and support our Australian Defence Force families. We are also dealing with the 122 recommendations from the Royal Commission into Defence and Veterans Suicide. We are changing our approach to mental health and wellbeing, and we have a dedicated branch to help us lead that and strengthen our commitment and approach to workplace mental health and wellbeing. We're also integrating with the Department of Veterans Affairs further in and around this. For those that don't know, we've just rolled out a program called Safe Side. Professor Tony Pisani developed it for us. He has also been working with the US in developing this program. We've retrained our clinicians to look at suicide in a different lens to help us work with command to support people. Because if we can implement any recommendations from the Royal Commission that make a difference and prevent suicide, it might help Australia with what is a national tragedy, that is death by suicide. So there are many factors that actually influence mental health and wellbeing. And so we're all anchoring across health, social support and connection, education, skilling, employment, meaningful activity, meaning and spirituality, home and housing, income and finance, justice and safety, recognition and respect. We're trying to come left of a clinical intervention with those factors and support our people so they don't become unwell. That contributes to ADF fighting, warfighting preparedness. So people don't realise the uniformed Australian Defence workforce, including nurses, dentists, psychologists and doctors, is approximately only 2,000 people full-time and 1,700 people in the reserve force. I was told if you consider the MCG and all the bays in the MCG as the available health workforce across Australia, the ADF doesn't fill a bay. We don't have a massive capability there for everyone's awareness, and we have to build it. We rely substantially on our reservists in that respect. We rely substantially on the health networks across Australia in that respect. And the National Defence Strategy and the Workforce Plan has very specific tasks for us to grow a new health system and to work a theatre health system that is integrated with the Australian health system. So we also know when a person embarks on a military career, their family, whether they like it or not, is also embarking on that career. And so we also are putting in place many different support aspects to support families. 68% of the ADF indicated they were in a relationship. Over 1/3 have children, and 12% have other caring factors that they have to take into consideration. So we have to set the right policy settings to account for that and the needs of families to enable military service. We know families face additional pressure that come with balancing the disruption of our military training, our exercises and deployments, relocation, childcare, education, spouse employment. So we're increasing our services in that respect. People don't realise we post to 52 deployable ships or submarines or aviation squadrons and clearance diving teams in the Navy across 14 shore bases. Army has 147 units across 157 locations, and Air Force has 128 units across 28 locations. We have to balance that career approach, and it's essential that we do post people, but we only post around 1/3 of people who require a removal. We are really putting into place some management aspects to help retain our people in that respect. We have lots more to do, and you've heard me allude to those. You'll see a new candidate portal, you'll see a career discovery hub, you will see us go faster in due course. But all I can tell you is I do have confidence that's going to happen because I see the green shoots now. And I know, and it's an incredible privilege, it's an honour, it's an incredible challenge that we need all the support and feedback for, to support and grow the future Australian Defence Force, to skill the Australian Defence Force to recruit people for the future of Australia. and I can tell you that the people I work with are incredibly committed in doing this. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we don't have time for questions, but I'm sure that General Fox would be delighted to take any questions from you over afternoon tea. But she's given us a most powerful presentation in relation to a large number of initiatives the Defence is undertaking to try to fix the recruitment and retention problem.